With Seattle electing a new mayor this year, the race for Seattle's city attorney isn't getting as much press, although I do think it should. It's pretty important. Pete Holmes is seeking a fourth term, really unprecedented. A previous challenger, I want to note, a previous challenger named Steve Fortney, you might remember we interviewed him on the show. Well, he dropped out of the race. Cited bad timing, and so that went nowhere. But a familiar face has now jumped in. The name Ann Davison should sound familiar to you if you follow local or state politics. After all, she's run 3 campaigns in less than 3 years and even managed to change political parties along the way. She and I spoke about her latest run, this time for Seattle City Attorney, and why she's not willing to give up while so much is at stake. Ann, we appreciate you joining us back on The Divide. It's been a while.
It's been a minute, is what I like to say.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask the obvious question out the gate. You ran for city council in Seattle. You lost. You switched parties, became a Republican, ran for lieutenant governor and lost. And now you're running for Seattle city attorney. Is this a game of musical chairs or what's going on here?
It is time to look at the message I'm saying. The message is exactly the same. I'm fighting the same fight that I was started when I became civically engaged as just a mom, trying to explain this to my 2 young kids of what is happening in the city of Seattle, of the town they're growing up in, and seeing people clearly in need. And no issue has been addressed adequately. No issue has measurable improvement. It is the same battle. It is finding a space to talk where there are voices unheard, that are people ignored and neglected, and we need to see a coming together. And that means it's time to disarm all the political apparatus, whatever you want to call it. It is about people and issues. Period.
Yeah, so we've got obviously the civil side, the criminal side. On the criminal side, the city attorney's office deals with misdemeanors. The criminal side, obviously more public facing. I just want to go through some of the challenges facing that office right now, which is causing a lot of division. One of them is repeat offenders, people who are in front of municipal judges dozens of times, sometimes 100 times, and there's really no change to their behavior or their outcomes. How would you handle repeat offenders differently than the current Seattle city attorney, Pete Holmes?
Well, we have seen, he likes to tout that he only has, I heard, 60 people in jail currently. Like, this is a prideful thing. And really, when you take a look at our downtown corridor, you can see that's actually alarming. He likes to say that he prosecutes less than half of what gets referred. His numbers are 13,000 police referrals, 7,300 charges brought, and less than 1,000 go to court. We are seeing people that are not responsive to the alternatives to jail time. And we need to have those there. We need to see a balance of our limits of society, frankly, right? We have these limits that we live within, and they are our laws that we have created, and that's how we live together. And we are not seeing one side of those limits being held. And frankly, we need this member of society, this department, to do that function. Otherwise, this is what we've got. And we certainly don't need more of the same or even more of the same, right? Like an increased amount of the same approach. We need to have the balance of the limits here. And so those repeat offenders are the ones that are not going to be responsive to those alternatives. They've been tried. As long as we've given people a chance, right? We are about wanting to make sure we meet people where they're at, but it's also balancing the needs of the public, all members of the public, right? And so those people need to say, this is your limit. And we actually care enough about you. We're not going to just let you subsist alongside wherever you find a place to sit for that night, right? We're going to care about you and say, this is the hard line where no, we're not going to allow you to do that to yourself or to others, members of the public anymore. And I actually see that as the true compassionate thing to do. It's actually very cruel to not be that limit for someone when they're unable to set that limit for themselves.
All right, another very public issue that we've dealt with over the past year, rioting, criminal acts of unrest. I'm obviously not talking about peaceful protesters here. Pete Holmes has been criticized for giving people a slap on the wrist who, break windows, who commit other acts that are against the law during otherwise peaceful protests. How would your approach be differently when you've got people who cross the line?
Well, I think you said it by just the stance of the department. And the stance right now is that they don't really care. They frankly don't care about the permeating effects of what they call, quote unquote, low level crimes like that, the low level offenses that really who does it harm is really what the position looks like. To the outside, people in the public, it looks like, well, who does it really bother? It actually does bother. We're seeing so many retailers leave from our downtown corridor. The engine of our city, maybe the engine of our state, right? Businesses leaving that. And it's because of the response where there's not the stance of we are here to protect. And this department is the one where we set, again, the limits of what is acceptable and unacceptable socially when it comes to how we all get along together.
You know, when you talk about taking a harder line, for instance, with repeat offenders, taking a harder line with people who commit acts that are criminal during unrest, people are going to put you into a category. I mean, they'll probably call you what they call me, which is right wing. Yeah. But the reality is, you know, you did change over to the Republican Party. Republicans, they just don't do well in Seattle elections. It's a progressive city. So even though it's a nonpartisan position, aren't you concerned that you're going to be painted in that way and it'll make you unelectable?
You know, frankly, Brandi, I'm at a time where I personally don't care how people characterize me individually. What I care about is our city and that it's livable and the quality of life for everyone. And that means even that repeat offender. How is it something that is conscionable for me to let that person continually live in that type of an existence? I really do believe that there is more for that individual for their own life. And I think that we are being a better servant of society if we are helping somebody, again, set that limit. And it sometimes is an uncomfortable or maybe an unintuitive response because you want to say, well, let's have a heart and let's care. And so let's not do something that looks like it's a punishment. But, you know, frankly, as a mom with kids growing up who are observing, you know, there's one set of rules here, there's another set of rules here. I fear about, you know, their response as they become adults. You want to show that you engage, you don't ignore, you don't walk by and act like there's people that aren't there. But you also need to see that it is getting addressed. And there is no other member of society, the meaning member as the legal department I'm talking about, that functions in this way for our city. And I do not want to see people start to take it within their own control and that they then become that part, right? That they respond that way negatively to someone. We need to, again, meet people where they're at. But that means sometimes the limits have to be set for them. And we're saying this is not acceptable behavior. I'm certainly not right wing. If anything, I'm maybe politically homeless, right? You know, I walked in a Lawyers for Black Lives Matter walk over the pandemic, and I was called all kinds of names from the far right for doing so. I think it's important to know that I'm not really looking for partisan one way or the other. I'm saying people and issues, and our city is not safe for everyone, and it needs to take a different turn. And this one seat is the place where that turn needs to be made.
And I told Ann at the end of our interview, 3 campaigns, let me back on. A 4th campaign, probably not. And you can catch more of my interview with Ann Davison coming up Monday on the Divide podcast. And by the way, the city's primary election is coming up on August 3rd. We have also invited City Attorney Pete Holmes on the show. So that invitation stands.